Well, revolution came to British racing last week in the form of Free Racing Week, in which 9 racecourses opened their doors to the public at no cost. It was the first public manifestation of Racing for Change in action. And joining me now to talk about the Free Racing Week and Racing for Change in general is Nick Attenborough, RFC's PR Director. Nick, looking at the week as a whole, your reflections on it in terms of what you think worked, maybe what didn't work?
I think what worked to start with was that we got a pretty amazing crowd of people who probably haven't been racing for a long time or have never been racing. I think we reckon it's about 40,000 people. So that was fantastic news. From the sort of top line research results, we can see that about 2/3 of those people are very infrequent visitors to racing or have never been. And they've also told us that they're very likely to return, so that's fantastic. But obviously we've got to go a lot further. 40,000 people, there's a lot more in the country we want to get to go racing. The downsides, well, I think we're still learning. We researched about 800 people, and we'll be seeing those results next week, and hopefully they'll show us some areas where we need to improve communication, because if you're going to take people to a racecourse for the first time, you've really got to explain what's happening to them. And I think the racecourses work very hard to try and do that, but I'm sure there'll be things that we'll learn from it and try and improve if we do something similar again.
Nick, we've got lots of questions from the website used and the Racing Post readers to ask you. But one thing I'd just like to ask myself, having been at Wolverhampton and Ascot last week and spoken to some of the racegoers, is that they're all very, very enthused by the idea of coming racing for free. And some of the ones I spoke to were less enthused about paying the sort of prices that many racecourses charge for admission. Given that free racing isn't an RFC policy, and given that admission charges for other fixtures are very high, what can RFC do to tempt those racegoers back to the sport when they feel it's too expensive?
Well, I think certainly we can work with racecourses and create promotions that will attract those people to come back again. And I know Ascot, I think in the Racing Post, were putting in coupons which allowed people to come back 2 for 1. So that's really a half price offer. And I think for people who would be nervous of paying the full price straight away, it's a great way of getting them back. I think we're certainly seeing other promotions. Northern Racing are doing a promotion with Odds Checker that's just been announced, which is going to be on Wednesdays throughout the summer. I think there's about 14 fixtures which are encouraging people to come racing. And we need to find other ways of doing that, whether it's loyalty schemes or whether it's fun promotions that get people to think about it and see the value.
Nick, two readers, A.B. Lett and Richard Renshaw, asked me to ask you questions about RFC's objectives, and Richard in particular asked, can we please quantify objectives in terms of increase of attendance? Without this, we the public cannot assess the success of RFC. Are there numbers in your mind that you would like to reach in 5 years' time?
We're certainly agreeing and finalising what we might call the metrics. I think one of them will be helping racecourses boost attendances, but the racecourses also are doing a lot to try and achieve that. We need to also look at TV audiences, another very good judge of whether we're connecting to a wider audience. If you think that Channel 4 and BBC are reaching, when the Grand National, about 8 million, and Channel 4 is often getting over 1 million, 2 million viewers. If we can start to increase those numbers, then I think we're getting more people watching racing, which is fantastic. Obviously, we need to look at how betting revenues. Are people interested in betting on horse racing, having a flutter? Because at the moment, we're seeing that younger adults are much more interested in betting on football or poker. So there are a number of things we need to look at. But we're agreeing those, and we will be judged on those.
And what else will Racing for Change be judged on? Aside from attendances, if, as I say, in 5 years' time, we're doing a piece of the Racing Post, RFC 5 years on, was it a success or not? How can we judge your success?
Well, I think it'll have to be on a number of these different metrics.
Right.
I think we have to say that across the total, have we achieved growth or improvement? And if we haven't, then I think we'll need to find out why. And we won't be just judging them in 5 years. We'll be judging them every year. And one of the objectives I have is to take racing outside of the racing pages. We get very, very good coverage in this country for racing in editorial. We're one of the, we've got the Racing Post, of course, as a prime example of a daily newspaper that promotes the sport. I think we're the only sport in the country that has that. But what I've got to try and do is get racing talked about outside of the racing pages, on TV, in the national newspapers, and that's our only way of really connecting to people who aren't already race fans.
Nick, again, another question that was asked from one of the readers, Andrew Peelis, asks, why do racecourses not force horses to be galloped past the stands on the way to post? At Huntingdon last week, a Racing for Change free day, I overheard novice racegoers puzzled as to why they had not been able to see the horses they fancied in the first race. That is something that comes up quite a lot, horses disappearing from the paddock right to the start.
Okay, well that's something I'll try and find out a bit more about. I like this individual would say it's really nice to see the horses. We need people to connect to them. People who go racing, it's about the horse at the end of the day, and if we're not giving them the chance to see it, then I'm not quite sure why that's happening.
And Nick, read that, you say, you'll liaise with racecourses. Up to now, what has been, or how pleased or dissatisfied have you been about your relationship with racegoers? We had 9 racecourses in the RFC free racing week. I guess in an ideal world, there would have been more than 9 racecourses. Again, when you have changes that you'd like to implement, how responsive are you finding racecourses to be?
I think the racecourses, or the vast majority of them now, are very interested to talk to us about any ideas.
Yeah.
And obviously, this isn't the only thing we're going to do all year. I was at Chester yesterday talking about an idea that will happen in July, which I'm not going to tell you about yet.
Shame.
But we are wanting to work with racecourses around the country. I've also been up to Musselburgh and we're talking to them about some ideas that might happen somewhere in Scotland. And we want to take ideas that will promote racing to a wider audience, but also be fun for existing race fans.
For all race fans, or the vast majority of race fans, part of the experience of going to the races is having a bet. And again, at Ascot last week, we had one innovation, decimal odds, printed on the boards of 5 layers in the ring. A.B. Lett asked the question, certain bookmakers have been blatantly profiteering by shortening odds on big races. This is ripping off once-a-year punters. This whole issue of bookmakers in racing is one that you guys have been tackling. On the decimal issue, the bookmakers at Ascot were not happy with it. They didn't like it. Is that now dead and buried?
I don't know about dead and buried. We haven't seen the outcome of the research amongst the public that we spoke to at Ascot, but I think we would need the full cooperation of on-course bookmakers if we were to go any further. I think there are 2 very, very strong camps. There's one camp which says, let's keep the decimals, they're fantastic, that gives racing a character, and I have a lot of sympathy for that view. There's younger punters who are saying, hey, decimals is what about, fractions are history. And we may not be ready to switch to decimals yet, but you have to imagine in 5, 10, 15 years' time, it will gradually drift across, and it's really just how quickly that move happens. But it'd be staggering to imagine that in 100 years we're still dealing in fractions. It's just inconceivable to me. But whether we move as quickly as some people would hope, I'd be surprised.
Because for timing, at least, as you say, if you need the help of racecourse bookmakers, given what they said last week, they're not going to offer that help now, are they?
Well, they need to see a commercial reason for it to work for them. And but we are working with the bookmakers, particularly to look at each way odds on racecourses. And I think there's a very strong belief amongst the bookmaking industry that we do need to have standard terms wherever possible, and we need to encourage that so that you don't get some of the ludicrous situations that you've highlighted in your newspaper, where people are offering 1/8 the odds, a place at I think it was Newton Abbot or somewhere. That we need to stop.
And there's talk, isn't there, of a scheme whereby bookmakers will place flags on the top of pitches?
Some sort of device that will allow or will make clear to punters at the racecourse that these bookmakers abide by those rules. And it won't just be that. It's about how they treat the customer and how they look after the customer. I mean, we're all used to customer service in every other retail environment we head into, but racing needs to move with the times as well.
And so far, have you been happy with the cooperation you've had from bookmakers?
Yeah, I mean, I think a colleague of mine is doing all the liaison, and I think because it's probably the first time that the racing industry and the betting industry have sort of got together and said, let's see how we can improve betting for everybody.